You step into the barn just after noon in the middle of August. The heat outside feels heavy enough to bend the horizon. Dust hangs in the air. The thermometer nailed beside the fence reads 96 degrees. Your cattle are breathing hard. Chickens sit motionless, in the shade. The hayloft feels like a furnace ready to burst into flames. But then you pull open the barn door and everything changes. The air inside hits your skin cool and steady. Not freezing, not artificial, just calm. 55 degrees. The same temperature it held in January, the same temperature it will hold next summer. No fans rattling overhead, no compressor growling in the corner, no electric meter spinning faster every second. Just silence and cool air flowing through the building like the barn itself is breathing. The first time I saw one of these barns, I thought somebody was hiding machinery underground. I walked the walls looking for vents. I searched for ductwork. I expected to hear motors humming somewhere behind the stalls. There was nothing, just a dirt floor, old timber beams, and a man named Eli standing there smiling like this was the most normal thing in the world. Then he pointed toward the ground beneath my boots and said the entire system was under there. A trench dug 6 ft deep. One buried pipe. Total cost, about $300. Less than what most farmers burn through in diesel before harvest season even starts. That is the part nobody tells you. Every farm in America is sitting on top of an endless reservoir of free cooling. 6 feet below the surface, the earth never changes temperature. It does not matter if it is July in Texas or January in Pennsylvania. At that depth, the soil remains between 52 and 58 degrees year after year. The earth absorbs heat during summer. It releases warmth during winter. It balances itself naturally, while everybody above ground keeps paying monthly bills, trying to fight against it. The Amish understood this nearly 200 years ago, long before air conditioning units, long before HVAC contractors, long before utility companies figured out how to turn temperature into a subscription service. When Amish families settled in Lancaster County and Holmes County, they refused electricity, completely. But their animals still needed protection from heat. Milk still spoiled. Grain still molded. Livestock still suffered during brutal summers. So instead of buying machines, they turned to the ground itself. They dug trenches. Simple trenches, 6 ft deep, running from outside the barn to the inside. Inside those trenches, they laid hollow clay pipes, the same kind farmers used for drainage. The outside opening sat beneath shade with wire mesh covering the intake. The inside opening emerged near the animal stalls. Then nature handled the rest. Hot air from outside entered the buried pipe at nearly 95 degrees. As that air traveled underground, the cool soil surrounding the pipe pulled the heat straight out of it. By the time the air reached the barn, it had dropped, almost 40 degrees. The hot air inside the barn naturally rose upward and escaped through vents in the roof. That rising air created suction, pulling even more cool air through the trench. No electricity, no moving parts, just physics quietly doing what physics has always done. The Amish called it the cooling trench. Modern engineers eventually rediscovered the same idea and renamed it an earth-air heat exchanger, so it sounded complicated enough to sell. But the Amish were using this system generations before the first patents ever appeared. They built them for around $300 using clay tile, gravel, mesh, and community labor. Once buried, the trench lasted for decades. No maintenance contracts, no filters, no refrigerant, nothing to replace, nothing to fail. Compare that to modern cooling systems. A commercial barn ventilation setup can cost $18,000 before it even turns on. Then come the repair bills, the service calls, the wiring problems, the compressor failures, and the electricity costs that never stop climbing. Meanwhile, the trench underground keeps working silently year after year without sending anybody a bill. In 1923, researchers studying soil temperatures across Midwest farms discovered something astonishing. At exactly 6 FT underground, temperatures remained almost perfectly stable year-round. They also noticed Amish farms had already figured this out decades earlier through nothing more than observation and experience. No laboratories, no government grants, no university studies. Just generations of farmers watching the land carefully enough to understand it. But that knowledge never spread. By the 1930s, America had committed itself to electrification. Progress meant wires, motors, compressors, and monthly payments. Passive cooling systems suddenly became old-fashioned. The trench systems were ignored because they could not be monetized properly. You cannot build a billion-dollar service industry around a hole in the ground that works for 100 years. Then things became even stranger. In 1978, during the energy crisis, researchers working for the Department of Energy began investigating passive geothermal cooling for agricultural buildings. One researcher traveled through Amish communities measuring temperatures inside their barns. He documented airflow, humidity, bacterial levels, and cooling performance. His report concluded that Amish trench systems could reduce cooling costs by 94% compared to mechanical refrigeration. More importantly, he discovered the systems could be retrofitted into existing barns without rebuilding the structures. That report was supposed to reach agricultural offices nationwide. Instead, it quietly disappeared. Years later, documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests revealed internal discussions warning that widespread adoption of passive cooling systems could severely disrupt the HVAC manufacturing sector. Read that carefully. The systems were not hidden because they failed. They were hidden because they worked too well. Think about what that means. A trench dug by 6 men with shovels threatened companies worth billions of dollars because once installed, it eliminated the need for endless repairs, maintenance contracts, seasonal tune-ups, and replacement equipment. It was permanent, reliable, cheap, the exact opposite of modern business models. Still, the Amish never stopped building them. Every generation kept passing the knowledge forward quietly, while the rest of the country forgot it ever existed. When I sat with Eli outside his barn in Ohio, he laughed when I mentioned engineering reports and government studies. He said his grandfather dug the trench beneath that barn in 1934. His grandfather learned the method from his own father, who arrived from Switzerland in 1872. Eli said the only instruction manual they ever needed was the dirt itself. The design remains almost absurdly simple. The trench stays 6 FT deep because that is where temperatures stabilize. Standard barns use an 8-in pipe. Larger structures scale to 12-in. The pipe runs at least 100 FT underground to allow enough contact time between air and soil. The trench slopes slightly downward toward the building, so condensation drains properly instead of pooling inside the pipe. That alone creates remarkable cooling. But the Amish added another feature modern builders almost never mention. At the point where cool air enters the barn, they spread crushed limestone beneath the vent opening. The limestone absorbs moisture dripping from the pipe while also reacting with ammonia from animal waste. Instead of stale, humid barn air, the interior smells clean, dry, and fresh, even during peak summer heat. Animals stay calmer. Respiratory problems decrease. Flies swarm less aggressively because airflow remains constant and gentle. Then Eli explained the final piece of the system, the part almost nobody outside Amish communities knows about. Halfway along the trench, buried beside the pipe, sits a single unglazed clay jar filled with rainwater. That is it. One clay vessel hidden underground. The porous clay slowly releases moisture into the passing airflow. As the water evaporates, it strips even more heat from the air. The soil cooling and evaporative cooling combine together, dropping temperatures another 7 to 10 degrees. Air entering the barn can reach 48 degrees naturally. Refrigerator temperatures created entirely underground without electricity. The first written description of this method appeared in an Amish bishop's diary dated August 14, 1847. He described storing milk in a barn cooled by the trench and clay jar system, where it remained fresh for over a week during August heat. Modern science later gave this process a complicated name, evaporative geothermal coupling. The Amish simply called it practical knowledge, and the entire setup costs almost nothing. A terracotta irrigation jar costs about $18. Rainwater fills it once or twice a year. The jar can last 50 years underground if handled carefully. Meanwhile, the cooling effect continues every day without interruption. No utility company notices it. No inspector understands it. No contractor profits from it. Picture the scene now. It is mid-July. The afternoon sun is hammering the south side of the barn. Outside, temperatures reach 94 degrees. But inside, cattle stand quietly, breathing slow and steady. Hay remains dry. The wood beams carry the smell of cedar and straw instead of humidity and rot. Air moves softly across the floor and exits through roof vents without fans or motors. Somewhere underground beneath the barn, cool earth and buried clay continue working together exactly the way they did when somebody's great-grandfather first dug the trench over 100 years ago. That is what disappeared from modern life. Not just the trench itself, but the continuity of knowledge. The passing of practical wisdom from one generation directly into the next. Knowledge that did not require subscriptions, permits, corporations, or monthly bills. Knowledge simple enough to survive because it worked. When extension services abandoned these systems and companies pushed mechanical cooling everywhere, the knowledge did not vanish completely. It retreated underground along with the communities stubborn enough to ignore modern trends. The Amish preserved it simply by continuing to use it. Before I left Eli's farm, I asked him why nobody patented the idea, why nobody tried selling books or franchising the system. He looked at me quietly for a moment and then said something I have not forgotten since. When knowledge is given to you for free, you do not have the right to charge for it. You have the duty to pass it on. And maybe that is why this matters so much now. Because somewhere along the way, people stopped believing solutions could still be simple. They stopped trusting the ground beneath their feet. They forgot entire generations survived summers without compressors screaming outside every building. Yet the earth never stopped doing what it has always done. 6 feet below you, the temperature is still waiting exactly where it has always been. Your hardware store already has the pipe, the gravel, the clay jar, the limestone. The only thing separating most people from this system is a trench line marked across the shaded side of their property and the willingness to start digging. So this weekend, walk your land. Find the north side where the soil stays damp and cool. Measure out 100 feet. Stand there for a minute and picture what that trench could become. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, even 100 years from now, when somebody else inherits that same piece of ground, because the dirt beneath your boots still remembers everything people forgot.